Welcome to The Informed Investor, where we break down the latest financial headlines, bringing in research and insights to help you separate the news from the noise.
Welcome to The Informed Investor. Today we are coming from our Charlotte, North Carolina office, where we are hosting an educational event for financial advisors. Now, we're very fortunate that we have two of those advisors attending the show here today. And what we're going to do is we're going to dive into sort of the major stages when it comes to our financial journeys. So we're going to break it up into different age groups. We're going to look at 18 to 30 years old in the sense of what do I absolutely have to get right? And what do I want to make sure I avoid in terms of mistakes? We're going to take that same approach to ages 30 to 50. And then we're going to look at 50 to 65 and 65 plus. So we're going to break the show up into two parts. Part one, we're going to get up to 50 years old. So with that, let's get started here. And gentlemen, I really appreciate you joining the Informed Investor. Great to have you here.
Great to be here.
All right, so a couple introductions here. Mike, I'll start with you. Mike Mers, coming from Boise, Idaho. Your firm is Aspen Capital Management. Tim Slattery, coming from Tampa, Florida, Heritage Investment Group. So great to have you here. And I just have to say, Mike, Boise, Idaho, that's where I grew up. So two just ardent Boise State fans. Tim, you're just a loyal University of Florida fan. And this is probably the first time in your life you've been outnumbered by two Boise State fans.
That's true. And it's been a rough few weeks to be a Gator fan, but we're hanging in there.
Yeah, but still college football's here.
Absolutely.
Which is always great. Tim, let's start with you. A little bit of background about your career and a little bit about Heritage.
So I've been with Heritage since 2002. I'm the chief investment officer there. Firm's been in existence for 31 years. Actually, with one exception, all the six partners are friends from high school. So we go way back. It's very much a family business. We've extended the family to include some people from outside, but it's a very comfortable working environment with a lot of people that have known and trusted each other for a long time. And I think we convey that kind of feeling to our clients as well, which is a big part of, I think, a big contributor to the success we've had. And it's a super pleasant place to work.
And very close-knit, wonderful people, absolutely. Mike, let's hear a little bit about Aspen and your background.
So I started the firm 23 years ago in Boise. My background came out of school, went into the technology industry. From there, went into venture capital, but really always had a passion for serving families and individuals as opposed to institutional money. And started the firm 23 years ago. We built a firm of wonderful people that love serving clients. We work with families in about 32 states. About half of those are in Idaho. About half of those are outside of the state. And we love to work with people on sort of deep financial planning, as well as manage their portfolios.
And we are blessed to work with great firms like both of yours. So thanks for coming on the show here today. I think we've worked together, Tim, probably over 20 years. Dimensionals have worked with your firm, and Mike, we're right about 20 years as well.
Right at 20 years, yeah.
All right, so it's been a great couple decades, a lot of fun. Let's get into it here. And what I like to do on the show here, we like to read a couple of headlines. So I'm going to start with some headlines, but let's start with that first age group, sort of that 18 to 30. As we think about kind of young adults, they're getting into their working careers, thinking about how do I save my money, budget, all that goes in that age group. So let me start with a couple headlines here, and then I'll get your thoughts. Tim, I'll start with you, coming up these headlines here. The first one, why starting retirement investments in your 20s could change your life. Second one, Gen Z's number one investing choice is crypto. There's a lot of risk in that. Reaction first to the headlines, and then we'll get into the do's and don'ts in that life stage.
Yeah, so with the headline, the first headline you read, I think is, it's good advice, right? I would lead with that for someone of that age group, talking about getting started with investing early. For your first job out of college, or when you're in your young 20s, sometimes when I talk to young people like that, they think it's, money's tight. I don't have a lot of extra cash flow. But to whatever extent you can, you really should be thinking about making contributions to, if you have a 401k plan offering at your employer, there's two sources of free money there. you've got either a tax deduction if you're in a regular 401k plan, free money from the government, or you've got tax-free growth if you're in a Roth 401k plan. That's free money on the table. Take it. And then in most cases, you've got matching from your employer, which is another source of free money. You really should be grabbing that. And even if you can just put in up to the maximum of the match that your employer is going to give you, we really strongly encourage anyone to do that to the greatest extent possible. The power of compounding from that, when you look at the numbers, if you start when you're 22 or you're 23 and you're looking at retirement at 65 or older, if you look at the real returns of compounding over, let's say, a 40-year or 45-year working life, the numbers are staggering. And I've never seen anyone, if you ask the question, what is $10,000 saved today at an 8% return, what's that worth in 40 years or a 5% real return? I've never seen anyone overestimate that number, right? The number is always staggering. And the power of those years is really indescribable. So yes, the earlier you start, the better. Now with the second headline with crypto, that's the shiny new object, right? And look, it's hard to argue against that because it's done well. And as humans, we like to chase the shiny object. And I'm not going to tell anyone absolutely don't do it, but understand the risks involved. I think very few people actually understand it. I think when people jump into something like crypto, they're thinking of returns and not risk. And I would just say be educated on it. And if you are going to own anything in crypto, make sure it's a small, manageable portion of your portfolio and don't invest anything you can't afford to lose.
I'll go back to your comment. It's done well. I'll say it's done well recently. It's done well a lot of times, and it's done really poorly a lot of times, specifically around Bitcoin. So just know those massive swings you get in any kind of a cryptocurrency. Now, what would you add, or what are your reactions to some of the comments there?
Well, my first reaction is I just couldn't agree more with the comments on compounding. You know, in that 18 to 30-year-old age group, if you don't really understand the power of compounding and the power of starting early, you do yourself one favor out of this, push pause on this and go do some work and really understand compounding. Because if you can start and be disciplined in that 18 to 25-year-old age group, it'll change your life. I mean, it will really change your life going forward. The only other thing I'd add to that is just the power of the Roth IRA for these young people, right? Their ability to get money in that's going to grow tax-free for decades, not tax deferred, but tax-free. The combination of starting early, being disciplined, and leveraging whether it be a Roth IRA or a Roth 401k, if they've got an employer plan that offers the Roth option, which almost all of them do now. It's an absolute life-changing decision if you can get people to start right out of high school or college.
I'm going to come back to some of the Roth and the 401k stuff, but I want to go back to compounding for a minute. I think there's a theme out there that compounding has been called the eighth wonder of the world, right? It's like magic. And so you mentioned some numbers. I actually have some numbers here. And this is stuff I used to go over with my kids. I still got the original notes on here from when I used to meet with our kids and all their friends. And then their parents started to come into some of these conversations. But here's just a couple numbers I ran on just the power of compounding, just to get it out there. And I remember my dad had something he showed me when I was in high school following this framework. And it just stuck with me over the years. And I think it's pretty a common way to look at this. But Tim, you used a couple different numbers there. I'm using here, let's just say you saved $1,000 a year starting your career. And I'm using a 10% annualized return, just a historical return to the market over that time period. So if you saved $1,000 for your first 10 years and then didn't save again after that, at the end of 40 years, that would have turned into $305,000. It would have turned into $306,000. If you say, you know what, I haven't gotten my savings habit yet. I don't save my first 10 years, but I started saving $1,000 from every year from age 11 to 40, that would have turned into only $181,000. And so it just shows how incredibly important it is, like that magic, getting the money in right out of the gate, like you guys were just talking about there. Now, let's do another one here. And this is where I think it really struck home, at least with my kids and their friends. If you saved $1,000 every year but you increased it by 10% every year. So first year was $1,000, next year was 1,100, and then 1,200. It just grows over time. It would be worth 1.8 million at the end of that 40 years. So I mean, that's the impact here we're talking about compounding. You just got to start early and you're getting money in there, letting the market do its thing. All right, now let's go back to the ways you do that and go back to the 401k. So Tim, you're talking about how important it is to just get money in there, start at least get the match too on what you're doing there. How do you guys think about the priority of saving? And by that, I mean, let's just say somebody's got a budget, they've dedicated a certain amount to saving. Where do you start first? Do you start with a 401k? And then do you do a Roth IRA, or do you try to build the Roth into the 401k? I think that's where you're going, Mike. So maybe just expand on that a little bit. Which one do you start with?
I'll just echo what Tim said at the beginning. You've got to start with the free money, right? That matches that free money. So if you've got an employer retirement plan that's going to give you any type of a match, that's where you absolutely have to start, because you're getting that matching, that free money. So you've got to absolutely start there. And certainly our advice would be, to the extent that you can afford it, and even if you've got to tighten the belt a little bit to afford it, you want to start by completing that match, right? Contributing whatever you've got to contribute to get that full match. Because for a lot of employers now today, you might be doubling your money right out of the chute with your contribution plus the employer match. So now your $1,000 contribution gets doubled, or maybe at least a 50% with an employer match, and you're off and running. So that's certainly where I would start, right?
Yeah. With the tax benefits, it's free money on top of free money. It's it's sitting there on the table. You do whatever you can to grab it.
Yeah. And so you're talking about a Roth. The value of the Roth is you're funding that with after-tax dollars.
Well, but it works with a pre-tax 401k as well. It's going to depend on what tax bracket you're in. And if so, there's not a lot of 24-year-olds that are in the highest tax bracket, but if you are in a higher tax bracket, you want to consider taking that tax deduction from a regular 401k contribution, right from the start. And the answer to that, as with most financial questions, it depends on your individual situation. But whether it's a Roth 401k or a regular 401k, you want to put as much as you absolutely prioritize that above all else.
One of the questions we got from our kids as they graduated and got their jobs is, and we talked to them about, okay, you got to have some emergency savings as well. And they're like, well, how much and how long? So Tim, how do you think about that part?
That is maybe the most difficult question that I get, not just from people in that age group, but across all age groups. How much cash should I have on hand? And, the simple flippant answer is up to the point where you can sleep at night and then no more than that, right? But it's hard to say from person to person what that comfort level is. I would say for someone that's, a recent college graduate that doesn't have a lot of safety assets aside, 3 to 6 months minimum is what we typically say you should have, because if you do lose your job, if circumstances change, if you get a better job and you have to move, but there's cost to that, you want to have that emergency fund ready. And I would say 3 to 6 months as a minimum.
And make that your top first priority, right? You got to build that out, like right out of the gate.
That's right.
Right. Okay.
That's right.
Yeah. Anything you'd add to that?
No.
That part of it?
No.
All right. So those are some of the must-dos, right? Save early, get it into your 401k, make sure you're getting the maximum amount of match on that. Because you talk about free money. Like people say, well, it's free, but there's always a cost to something, but this truly is free.
It's free.
It is truly free.
It is free.
And then the growth of that tax.
I wasn't sure where you were going with that, but no, there isn't a cost to it. It's free. Yeah.
All right. Let's talk about some of the don't do's. Like just don't do these things when you're a young adult. What comes to mind? What have you seen where you just like, no go?
Credit card debt. So do not run up your credit cards. Read the fine print. The interest rates are egregious, and it's you're young, got your first credit card, you have a job, and it is right. And so that can get you. So the power of compounding on your 401k is magic, and the power of compounding on your credit card debt is also magic. It's magic at a higher rate, and it's working against you, and it's magical for a credit card company. You absolutely do not want to put yourself in that situation.
In higher rate, I mean, it's often 17, 18% or
Absolutely.
more.
Right.
That's
and
what
that used to be illegal. but it's not anymore. And yeah, that can really get you in a lot of trouble really fast. Then you end up with credit issues, and that will follow you around for a while.
Yeah, Mark, that's the logical one for sure, is just any consumer debt, avoiding that at all costs. Another one that actually some of the young members of my team told me that are not far out of college said, man, you got to avoid the college classmate that got a job working for an insurance company. Right. And they're out there and they're calling all their, friends that they went to school with, trying to sell them insurance related products that they really don't need, that tend to be really expensive, littered with lots of fees and expenses and whatnot. So I would say be wary of your friend that went to work for a financial services company or an insurance company that needs to hit a quota and sell some products.
Yeah. And there's certainly a role for insurance, and we'll come to where that comes into play in the right stages. Yeah. My definitely don't do is do not go buy a fancy car.
Yes.
Come right to university. Yeah. And you see these kids, they go, I finally got some money. I've got an income. I go get a fancy car. And then like they need a new tire. You're like, well, I can't afford it. The tire's way too expensive. You got to think about that.
Do you know how much brakes cost? Actually, you know what, Mark? I would actually extend that to just any depreciating asset. Right? Could be a car, could be, it could be a boat. It could be anything that depreciates in value in that time window that we're talking about. Outside of covering your living expenses, right? Building your safety bucket and then getting going on long-term savings. Most people aren't going to have much left over, but the worst thing you can do is buy a depreciating asset like a fancy car.
Yeah. Well, I like the order there. Pay your basic needs. And then you prioritize saving. Pay your future self. I've heard you say that before.
Yep.
All right. The other thing here we talk a lot about is like the daily trip to Starbucks. I'm just going to go drop $5 on a coffee or something like that. So I've got some numbers here as well. All right. So here's the assumption I made is, let's just say that you start going to Starbucks once a week, and I used $4 in my example. It's probably a little low, but let's just say once a week you go buy a Starbucks. And that comes out of your savings, right? So you're saving less.
Yeah.
So one time a week, $4. And I mentioned earlier, if you save $1,000 a year for 40 years and you increase it 10%, that's 1.8 million. If you go buy that Starbucks drink for $4, I shouldn't just call it Starbucks. It could be anything.
Yeah, right.
Whatever.
There's a lot of them.
Yogurt.
I haven't found any coffee shop that discriminates on price.
Yeah. So, all right. So let's just say we do that once a week and it's $4. That 1.8 million goes down to 1.4 million. I mean, it's just mad. That's over a 40-year comp. You go back to the compounding, right?
And that's
it's
once
just
a week.
Massive.
That's once a week.
Yeah, I was going to say, who do you know that buys coffee one time a week?
It's 4 or 5 times a week. And that much worse, right? That was one of the things I had thought of is that daily habit of Starbucks, and don't play the lottery. I mean, that's a tax on people that are bad at math, right?
Don't buy lottery tickets. I remember I was going through this with my daughter and her friends, and I mentioned the $4, and they started laughing. I'm like, what's so funny? They're like, Mr. Gochner, we could buy yogurt, but it's $9. Yeah. I'm like, oh, geez. Okay. I go, who's paying for that? But I was like, you are. Right. All right. So that's the 18 to 30 age group. All right. Any last thoughts on that one as we ramp it up here a little bit?
I think we covered it.
Okay. Let's get into, and we're using these so broad bucket of ages, like 30 to 50. There's nothing magic about those ages. It's more of a life stage, but
hey, let's go back. Let's go back to 18 to 30. The one thing we didn't talk about is, okay, so how are you going to invest your money in that time, in that season of life, right? So the only thing I would add to that early stage of life is you want to be pretty aggressive, right, with your investments. Now, you want to be really broadly diversified. You want to be really low cost. So do this in an intelligent way. But we want to make sure that we're really trying to maximize our long-term returns. So when we get that money into our 401k or our Roth IRA, we want to make sure we're really intelligent about getting access to the global equity markets in a really broadly diversified, low-cost way. Because the only way that compounding works in our favor over the long term is if we're getting really good, very long-term, multi-decade returns.
Well, when you say you want to get aggressive, what do you mean by the aggressive part?
Well, what I mean by aggressive is, for me, for my kids in that, 18 to 30-year-old window, for retirement funds that they can't touch for multiple decades, I don't really want them owning bonds, right? I want them owning higher risk, higher expected return assets like global equities. So, for me, with my kids, it's, hey, let's go buy a really broadly diversified, low cost global equity fund. We're not worried about volatility. This is money that's in retirement accounts that we can't touch for decades. So let's not worry about volatility. Let's just try to maximize our long-term returns.
So 100% equity is 100% stocks.
100% stocks.
Completely agree.
And for some people, it's really easy. They've, in a retirement plan, especially, they've got a target dated fund, right? That's going to kind of get them that diversification and whatnot for them. And I would say just pick that furthest target date, that furthest date out into the future. That's going to kind of maximize the risk return of that portfolio and have you in something that's 100% global equities.
Yeah, I like your comment. Globally diversified, very cost effective. And I would just say disciplined on that too. Mm-hmm. Don't worry about the headlines. Don't worry about, like you said, the volatility, prices going up and down. Just block it out of your mind and just let markets work, get your compounding.
And don't gamify your investments. I'm seeing, friends of my daughter, high school kids, on their phones trading options and futures. And, perhaps that's a topic for another episode. We can get into that, but that's exciting, but probably not a great idea from an investment standpoint.
Well, you guys are advanced in Florida. We don't do those things in Idaho.
You'd be surprised. Look, Mr. Slattery, I'm trading options. Like, wow, that's
get that off
scary.
your phone. Yeah, delete that app.
Yes.
All right, going into the next phase of life here. The next stage is sort of the next stage of 30 to 50. You start thinking about things like having a family, maybe getting married, having a family, home, stuff like that. So what are the things we have to get right in that bucket?
So I would say learn about home buying when you're in that stage of life. I think that's when you're probably getting to the point where you're going to settle down, you're going to have a family. I think you need to learn about what it means to own a home. It's not just throwing the money in and wind it up and let it go. You've got to learn about taxes. You've got to learn about insurance. You've got to learn about mortgages and all the responsibilities that come along with that. So, I mean, that's at top of mind, I think, for a lot of folks in that stage. And also, let's learn about saving for college. Again, in that stage of life, a lot of folks might have kids prior to that. I think our generation waited a little bit longer. I think of, post 30 is when most of my cohort became parents. And again, the power of compounding and starting early. And I tell my clients, whether it's their new parents or whether they're new grandparents, look into prepaid college or more frequently a 529 plan. And then we start to talk about the power of compounding again. It's probably not a 40-year window, but let's talk about an 18-year window and open up a 529 account as soon as you've got a Social Security number and start putting away as much as you can. And again, pretty aggressive. We don't want to be 100% equity during that entire ride. We want to scale back the risk as the kids get older, but the sooner the better. And look at the tax advantages on the back end of those 529s for paying for college.
Tax advantage being it grows tax deferred,
absolutely,
right? And then you can pull the money out if it's for qualified expenses,
qualified college,
for
qualified education expenses. It comes out tax free, and the definition. So as an owner of a 529, it's usually the person that funds the account is the account owner, and the student to be is the beneficiary. You can change those beneficiaries as the owner of the account, and the definition of who counts as a family member beneficiary is extremely liberal and very wide, and you can change the beneficiary of an account over to a sibling or other family members pretty widely defined, and it can go down several generations. If you don't need it for your own kids, it could be for the grandkids or even longer, and then the compounding story starts to get even better.
It's an incredible program to grow tax deferred, and the flexibility that comes with that and changing names.
It starts to look
that.
like a perpetual family education trust that's tax free.
All right, let me go back to the home
Yeah.
comment for a minute, because I think people, like you said, okay, you got to get a mortgage, you got to get insurance, things like that. But what about when the dryer breaks, or you need a new refrigerator, or you got to get the hose? One of our colleagues, Jake DeKinder, who you guys know, in fact, is oftentimes on the show here. He got a text from his wife this morning. There's a leak coming out of the ceiling. He's like, well,
the dreaded leak.
Turn it off, and I'll deal with it when I get home.
That was not on the calendar today.
Like,
where's the main water line?
That's all part of home ownership. And I think there's a view out there where people think, well, my home, that's where I'm going to make a bunch of money because over time, the value of my home increases. How do you guys think about that, home ownership versus perhaps renting? Any thoughts on?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and especially at the beginning of this age bracket we're talking about, right? Somebody in their early 30s. I do think it's an important thing for people to recognize. You mentioned a number of the costs, and then you added maintenance to it, right? So home ownership, let's not forget the cost of selling a home. Right? Usually in different parts of the country, it's going to be about a 6% real estate transaction fee if you're going to sell it. So if you're getting into a place as a first-time home buyer with like 5% down, and you need to sell that home a year or two later, and the transaction costs 6%, you've just wiped out your entire down payment, right, in needing to sell the place. So I would just be really conscious of making sure that you're really ready to buy a home. So you're, from a career standpoint, you're in a place where you feel comfortable that you're not going to need to sell this home and move in a real short-term period and eat up a whole bunch of your down payment with transaction costs. And then also you're financially in a place where you can't just afford the down payment, but you also have some backstop money so that when you do get the leak or the appliances go out or all of the fun maintenance things that we have with homes over time, you can actually afford it. Home ownership's great. Hopefully everybody listened to this at some point will be able to afford to do it, but it's no panacea early in your life.
Is there guidelines out there? Say, hey, if let's all make up a number. My mortgage is $1,000 monthly. Is there a number that says, here's kind of what your overall maintenance cost will be for a home? Like, is it 10% of your annual mortgage payment, or 5%?
I don't know of a benchmark for that. Because it depends how much did you put down, right? I mean, did you put 10% down on your home, or did you put 50, right? So,
maybe I should have said the value of
the
your
value
home.
of the home.
Yeah, that's probably a better way I should have said that.
I've heard 3% of the value of the home is what you should kind of bank on for maintenance on a yearly basis. I've never really dug down to see if that's accurate. I can tell you anecdotally, those come. It's not 3% every year.
That's right.
It's 0 for a couple of years, and then then it's 10.
Yeah.
But it's I don't think owning versus renting is clearly superior in every case. Renting might be a better choice to your point in a lot of situations. It's hard being in Florida. It's hard to convince people in Florida at this point that real estate isn't always a home run investment, right? And we've had a really, really nice run. I'm sure in other parts of the country, it's that concept is much easier to sell.
Absolutely, yeah, we're right there with you.
Yeah. Anything you want to add?
I would just say a couple of other things that I might think about. Tim's touched on 2 of the 3 like tax-free vehicles that we have. He's touched on Roth IRA. He's touched on the 529 plan. The third one, which isn't used nearly as frequently, that can be really helpful in this time frame of life, is to start thinking about that HSA account, that health savings account, which is another and the third of the 3 tax-free vehicles for people that want to start accumulating some tax-free growth in an account to pay for future medical expenses later in life. Someone that's doing a great job of saving for retirement, doing a great job of maybe funding kids' 529 plans. If they've got a little left over, an HSA account can be a great way to continue to get tax-free compounded growth over time.
So something like that, you can fund it. And so if I do have a medical cost, I just pay for it with my normal earnings. Right. Don't use the HSA because that grows tax-free over time. And that's pretty flexible too, right? Just save your receipts
Yeah, that's right.
way
It's
down the
actually
road, you can-
functions very similar to a 529 plan. You save your receipts. It's kind of an on your honor system. And you're right. You use it as an account that would continue to grow and invest over time. And you'd be paying for some of those medical expenses out of your pocket. The only other one I was going to bring up, Mark, in this phase, 30 to 50 is when we start having families, having kids. And that's certainly when we need to start thinking about life insurance. And I think this is a point where, for us, certainly term life, we think is the way to go. It's very low cost. You can buy it, quite easily, get plenty of coverage for a really affordable amount. So someone that's in that position in life, I think term life is a great way for them to start making sure that they've got their family protected.
Any guidance on dollar amounts you want to think through on something like that?
That's another it depends question. Yeah, but it's, to your point, start young because it's much less expensive as, I think in our age cohort, if you all have checked out the term life market for yourselves recently, it's it's a much higher dollar amount than you were paying when you were in your 30s. So, I think that's somewhat, how much should the benefit amount be on the insurance? I think that's more intuitive. What makes you feel comfortable? But $10,000 isn't going to do it. Right? I mean, if you're a high earner, $1 million is probably a starting point.
Yeah.
Well, maybe go ahead.
I was going to say, certainly at the back end of this age group, someone that's around 50, a great thing at that point is to have a financial plan. And if you've got a well-done financial plan, it's going to tell you exactly how much you should have. If you're at the beginning of that, you're young in life, you've just had your first kid and whatnot, I think you're right. It's kind of intuitive of thinking about, okay, what situation would you want to leave your spouse in? Okay, well, maybe I want to make sure that the mortgage is paid off if something happened to me. Maybe I want to make sure that there's money for education for the kids, right? You're leaving your spouse in a position where if something dramatic happened to you, right, the spouse is in a good situation. So those are some things that I think people often think through as, okay, what if any mortgage do I have? How many kids do I have? What type of maybe education funding would I like to make sure is taken care of? And I think that's a great place to start.
And I've also heard too about having extra money available because it's such a difficult time for the surviving spouse that it just gives you a little extra flexibility if you need to take some time away from work or something to be able to afford that one.
Yeah.
One other thing I want to get your thoughts on, and I'm not sure if you have any advice or guidance on this, but go back to perhaps what's the most important decision you make in your life. And we've been talking a lot about families and kids and homes. But if you go a little bit before that, it's who you marry. And I'll speak for myself. I don't know if I have guidance to say, hey, here's how to make sure it's a solid marriage or not. But it is probably the most important decision you'll ever make because there's so many things that come from that.
I would say if you look at the data, right, I believe that the number one cause for divorce is usually financial.
Okay, that's a good answer.
Right?
Good answer.
It is usually financially linked. So if we work backwards from there, right, we know that finances and financial matters create a tremendous amount of friction in a lot of relationships, right? So I think just knowing upfront and being on the same page with your partner as to what your financial goals are going to be and how you're going to fund and work to meet those goals. I think it's probably pretty rare that two people come together in a marriage that think about money exactly the same. That's probably a fairly rare occurrence. But I think just spending the time and energy up front, communicating well, making sure that you have priorities, making sure that you have goals that you're both bought into, doesn't mean you can't approach things differently, but as long as you're both on the same page with respect to some of the goals that you're trying to achieve, I think it increases the likelihood of success long-term much better and reduces a lot of friction in a marriage because we know that money issues is the leading cause of divorce.
What are some of the things you don't do this in that 30 to 50 age group?
I'll take that one. I think we talked earlier about buying depreciating assets as a younger recent college graduate, but that carries through all stages of life. And I think towards the later part of this stage of life, we're starting to think about some new toys, expensive cars, yes, that we spoke about before, but also boats, airplanes, second homes. There's a place for all those things, but we typically recommend that you rent boats, you rent airplanes, you rent second homes, and yes, buy your primary residence if that's right for you, if you're going to be in a particular place on a more permanent basis. But from a financial standpoint, buying large, expensive, depreciating assets is usually not a good play.
And Mike, it goes back to you said earlier about if you have a financial plan, that helps guide your decision making, and that probably clarifies some of these things, the wants versus the impact it has on my future state.
And that's when you know if you can really afford it or not.
Right.
All right, guys, that wraps up part one. A couple things that jump out to me from that is just absolutely make sure you're taking advantage of tax-deferred investments, 401ks, the Roths, HSAs, 529s, things like that. Be incredibly disciplined with your investing. Make sure it's globally diversified and just let it grow over time. I mean, those are the big ones there, right? Let your money work for you and be very careful how you're thinking about your spending. So we'll come back here in a moment on part two, where we look at life after 50 years old. So thanks everybody for joining the Informed Investor, and be sure to hit subscribe and get to part two of your investments after 50. Thanks.